Solutions Radio, where we explore and expose the different aspects of the human experience through creativity and spirituality. Now enjoy your show with host Jennifer Hellman. Hi everyone, this is Jennifer Hellman and this is Abstract Solutions Radio. Today's guest is a wonderful book. And Sierre, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, Jennifer.
Yay. Good morning. Sierra-prasada is the daughter of Dan-millman. Dan-millman, who is a spiritual wizard in my book, but she's also a writer and a journalist who has written some wonderful books herself. And the book that we're talking about, Sierre, is literally, it's like a divine intervention for me. So I thank you for writing the book. They've been bugging me to write a book. And Creative Compass is really built around 5 universal stages of creativity. And it really is a great guidebook for writers, artists, and innovators who really have a good story and want to share it. And literally, I've been having such a hard time settling down because I've got that sticky idea that has been with me for like decades. And it's getting to the point that the universe is saying, enough, time to sit down, really focus, get it done. And your book really has helped me with the steps to really focus, settle, ground, and get it done. So I thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I'm really glad to hear that.
So let's back up a little bit. Why did you and your dad decide to write this at this time?
Well, the idea originated with my dad, who over a career that has spanned about 30 years and I think it's 16 or 17 books, had every 2 years he would bring up the idea for a while of, wanting to someday do a writing book, and he had taught writing before, and kind of maybe in a parallel story, he had edited my work when I was very young. He'd always made it clear to me how important writing was, just growing up with an author as a father. And as I grew older, I started to look at his work and edit his work and give him suggestions. So we kind of had worked together for years. So these two different developments sort of dovetailed when he decided it was finally time to do his writing book, and he'd also wanted to collaborate with me a little more formally, and so he saw this as a great project for us to work on together. And indeed, so much, we've been having this conversation on writing throughout the years, and so much of this book, in a sense, in the back, sort of the background of it, is really a book about the conversation we have while writing, whether it's a conversation with ourselves, a conversation with other authors, both real and, sort of summoned up, other authors we read, long dead authors even. That conversation is really crucial and really central to the writing process and the creative process.
And it's interesting how the legacy of writers, because it's like you said, even long gone, authors are still inspiring people by just simple phrases of what they have said about the creative process. I know that's for me, and you include those in the book. And in the book that I find very, very helpful for me are just even the 5 steps you want to go through and talk about the different steps in a creative process.
Sure. So just to give a really brief introduction, my dad and I come to writing from very different backgrounds, very different experiences of writing. Just to be a little concrete, my dad, is someone who really ends up developing more of a story he wanted to tell. He started out as a gymnast, as a competitive gymnast, and over the years of working with athletics and getting more involved and interested in spirituality, he came up with a message he wanted to communicate to the world, and so he had to study writing, in a sense, to prepare himself to communicate that message. Whereas for me, I really came to writing, more as a craft, just loving the craft from a very young age, and had to write for many years, only occasionally sort of writing, based on my own desire to communicate something, more often responding to assignments, whether in school or as a journalist. And it was only later that I found more things that I wanted to say. So we knew that we didn't want to be prescriptive in the sense of saying, okay, these things have worked for, us individually, and therefore they must work for you. We knew that wasn't necessarily true. And so we had a good idea, since we were so different, that things that worked for both of us might be more universal. And the core of that really is these 5 stages: dream, draft, develop, refine, and share. And do you want me to say just a tiny bit about each of these?
Please.
Sure. So the dream stage, is a little different from what we think of when we just think of dreaming. The dream stage is more than a receptive realm of ideas. It's actually that period of time and that space in which we find what you've already referred to as a sticky idea, an idea that is really personally meaningful to us and that just keeps, coming back to us and catching our attention and refuses to let us forget it. And the dream stage is the time in which we cultivate that sticky idea and find, either the story or the argument, or if it's not a piece of writing, the sculpture or the drawing or the dance within that idea. The dream stage doesn't really end, per se. We keep dreaming throughout the creative process, but at some point we move more deliberately toward drafting. And that's when we really set out to tell, and I'll just use story as a model here, as we do in the book, tell a story on the page from a beginning through a middle to an end. We know it's not going to be, ready for publication. It's our first draft. But at the same time, we aim to complete that one thing and to have something specific, a manuscript, to work with. And this is where we really confront what is the central mystery of the creative process. I mean, when we're procrastinating, when we're full of self-doubt, when we've fallen into inertia, it can seem like the hardest thing is just to complete anything, just to sit down at our desks, or stand up at our desks nowadays, and write or create. But really, pretty much anyone can sit down and write something with a beginning, middle, and ending, no matter how uninspired they might feel. The question then becomes, how do you transform that, into something that is going to be basically what you might consider a kind of the most expressive translation of our own thoughts, of our own feelings, of whatever drove us to create that thing, to translate it in such a way that the reader or viewer can access that and that it can have the same power that it had on us. And really that transformation, is basically we accomplish that transformation in what we call the develop stage, which is the 3rd stage, and we call it the missing link. Because it's really easy just to move from writing a draft to just sort of polishing it, fix some spelling errors, change some sentences around to make them a little more grammatically elegant, format it, make sure it's in the right font, and then be done. And in fact, what we often need to do, often our work doesn't come out perfectly the first time. We might need to cut out large, chunks of text. We might need to write lots of new text. We might need to shift around paragraphs. We might need to, just to do all the kind of transformative work that is not covered by the next stage, refine, which is what we do when we know we have told our story on the page, but we need to pare away, the words that maybe aren't contributing quite as much. And we need to go ahead and do that spell check and that grammar check. And for that reason, that stage is the stage just before share, which is when, of course, in the contemporary era, we have so many opportunities. There's so many different ways we can share a piece, whether it's, an online newsletter or a book, published by a traditional publisher, and pretty much everything in between, with digital publishing, blogging, audiobooks, and so on.
So the process, the thing that I really like is you guys put together questions to help the writer or the artist, others to the artist, continue the process along the way, giving them suggestions on how to build characters and really enhance the story even further instead of, because it is, in a lot of ways, it's the details within the story that really captures the imagination, and yet you don't want to give the story away by putting too much detail. And you guys really have a nice way of putting the questions to really expand those ideas, to really push a person to the next level. With that, do you think that is because of your journalist background that you know to push it a little bit further?
That's a great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it just to push the story a little bit further, because as a journalist, you want to get to the heart of the truth of what's really going on. And I'm just wondering if that experience, you think, helped you with the creative artist to continue that journey.
Yes, I think that's a great question, and I think that is absolutely true. It wasn't so much, there was an aspect of it that comes with, training in journalism, because definitely asking questions is one of the things you're expected to do in any interview. But I would say it was more a combination of being a journalist. I went to journalism school myself, which was a good experience for me, graduate school. And after that, I worked as a journalist, and the combination of those two things, and really my sense of what it meant to be a journalist. So that was something I thought about a lot, and something that drew me to the journalism field in the first place, is this idea that being a journalist wasn't so much a profession as it was a practice. It was a way of approaching the world. And this is something that I actually wish that people understood, people who weren't as familiar with the work of journalism, as opposed to the product, the newspapers we read, and so on every day. I wish that people better understood that so much about being a journalist, about journalism, is, again, this approach to the world, and this idea that maybe we are not responsible for providing the answers, as we do in school. We raise our hands, but it's actually just our job to ask better and better and better questions. And that those questions are actually extremely informative, and that they can lead us forward, in this case as creative artists, in a way that answers, might not be able to.
Right. Which immediately gets me back to your dad asking us better questions in Spiritual Warrior, and he refined what he was asking and got better and better answers and a better understanding of what was going on. So it's you guys even, you guys dance very well together in this book and reflect very well in two different kind of perspectives, but both the end result is beautiful. And your dad really has had amazing success with his writing. To me, The Life You Were Born to Live is the Bible in numerology. It is the book. If you want to learn numerology, that's it. If you really are starting your journey, Spiritual Warrior, you got to go see that. I mean, so many of his books have opened my eyes. And I really had the pleasure of meeting him once at a conference, and I actually handed him my first book I published, of poetry. And he looked at me and goes, "Tell me, Millman, it's got to be good." Which, it was just nice to have that little bit of humor.
Yeah, that sounds like my dad.
She's very supportive. Now, growing up with that kind of background that he had, with almost that spiritual journey and that spiritual universal knowledge that he had, did it push you think, in going into journalism?
Well, my dad...
And asking those better questions?
Yeah. No, my dad, like I said, had a very different background than I did. And, my sister and I I have a younger sister as well as an older sister. But my younger sister and I did do gymnastics, like my dad when we were young. And so that was something fun that we shared. But even though my dad himself had been a competitive gymnast, he had had, again, a different experience of this, especially, female gymnasts have a different experience than male gymnasts. So he didn't necessarily want my sister and I to compete, and it wasn't something that we were particularly inclined toward anyway. So, and when it came to other disciplines, I would say my dad didn't have a lot of experience in journalism. He didn't come to writing. He had actually written some articles that he writes about in the book for Gymnast Magazine, but he came to journalism, again, from a very different angle, where he was really always sort of in pursuit of just writing and saying what he wanted to say. And for me, I kind of came to journalism just wanting to explore the world more, wanting to use it as more of a vantage point on the world. And that was more my own innovation. I started out doing journalism in school and then later decided to go to journalism school in part because, and actually this is where maybe I was a little bit more similar to my dad. I write in the book about how, one of the main reasons I went to journalism school was that there was a period of time when I was younger when I found, writing very anxiety-inducing. Partly it was just the deadline pressure of school. I went to a very intense school. And partly it was partly was this idea that, that anything you love is also going to cause you potentially a lot of stress because, you fear losing that thing. You fear being deemed, not good enough for that thing. And so there's a certain irony to the fact that that these two different emotional experiences end up being flip sides. So for me, when I chose to go to journalism school, I knew that I was going to be, in a sense, forced to write a lot. That I was going to be given deadlines. I was going to have to write on them. And this was actually a very successful experiment because I went in with this hypothesis that would help me to become more comfortable as opposed to more stressed, which I suppose it might have done. But for whatever reason it worked, and by the end of that experience, I really felt much more comfortable writing articles and much more comfortable writing a lot, and it was something that had simply become part of me in a sense in that time.
Now, you mentioned deadlines, so let me ask you something about that. For me, if I put a deadline and I don't make it, I tend to beat myself up. So what suggestions do you have for someone, because you really need to have that end point, or else it can be like me, that takes forever for this stupid book to get done. So what do you have for people who have trouble keeping a deadline because that pressure kind of freaks them out?
I would say it's a competition. In a way, deadlines are like questions where we're looking for, there's this big difference, I think, between deadlines imposed by others and deadlines imposed by yourself. So just very briefly, deadlines imposed by others tend to come with, whether it's stated or not, they tend to come with a bit of a quality control. If you have an article due by a certain time that has been assigned at a certain time, there's a limit. You're not going to be able to revise it 50 million times in that period of time.
Right.
So you know that you have to do a certain number of steps and get to a certain point, and that's going to have to be good enough. And often, that kind of short deadline, for example, associated with daily journalism, tends to be more functional. You write a more functional piece. You are conveying information. As you get more experience, you might be able to be more artful in that period of time, but it still has set limits. When you set a deadline for yourself, in contrast, and I think everybody struggles with this, you have to learn you have to learn sort of to gauge how much time you really need to get a certain task done, and you have to impose your own quality control for that particular layer, that particular phase of work. And I think that for anyone doing this for a while, you're not necessarily going to meet your deadline. And that is going to be just a prompt to you to say, okay, what I thought I was going to get done, I can't actually get done in that time. What might be a reasonable amount that I can get done in that time for the next time? Or how much time might I have needed to get done what I wanted to get done? I personally think it helps to set, if you're going to set your own deadlines, to sort of do a little bit of incremental training and to set your deadline like just outside the window of what you truly think you can accomplish something, so you can feel like you did it early. And that's a good feeling, and it's kind of motivating.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of self-manipulation there. But maybe, part of it also is, this is going to sound kind of ironic maybe, but maybe we need to go a little easier on the fact that we beat ourselves up. Maybe that's just like a natural thing that we do sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think, we kind of give ourselves a double burden of guilt. The first burden is, I didn't meet my deadline, I'm so terrible. And the second burden is, and look, here I'm being negative to myself, I'm so doubly terrible. And maybe we need to at least forgive ourselves for that second part.
Well, and then we put the self-doubt in there, too. It's like, am I really going to be able to do this because I haven't met my deadline? And I feel guilty about that. So it's like, that's
exactly.
How do you help with the self-doubt? And that it's like, it can really be overwhelming at times when you think of all the things that negativity can be overrunning you and overwhelming you. How can this book really help people, or what suggestions do you have that have that inspiration, that they have that idea they want to do it, but it's like they've had so many trouble just expressing themselves in the first place, and to take on, and it is, the creative process can be overwhelming. I know this book helps, so how do you feel this book can help those people kind of ground themselves to move forward with their idea and help with the self-doubt?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of different, actually, we address this topic from many different angles in the book, so I'll just cover a couple right now that I think are particularly, they're all helpful, but that are particularly easy to encapsulate. One of those is we have one particular technique, which again relates back to what we've been talking about already in terms of questions and conversation. And this is a technique we call dreaming in dialogue. And essentially, it's this idea that you can sit down at your computer, and let's just use the computer as an example, and you can open up a blank Word document. And, I find it helpful to separate, just to kind of go back and forth between italics and plain text. And in plain text, I allow myself to be the doubting, individual, the one who's not sure they can continue, not sure they have a good, not sure I have a good enough idea, not really feeling good about what I'm doing. And, and I get to confine that, in my plain text, because I'm writing as I go, to what I'll call my alter ego, which is another voice. And this is a voice I know I have within me, in part because, whenever anyone has ever asked me to question somebody who doesn't feel that they have the proper amount of information to help me, when I'm complaining about a problem or a challenge, might say to me something like, well, Sierra, if you knew the solution to the problem, what would it be? And maybe I'll sort of hem and haw a bit, but then I might say, okay, well, fine. If I knew, it would be this. And often that will give the other person I'm speaking to sort of a foothold to say, oh, well, actually, that sounds like it might work. I would never have thought of that because I don't understand this problem. And so I know that I have this other voice, this other idea, that is there. And so in italics, I basically allow that other voice to speak to me. And because one voice is already covering the self-doubt, is already being authentic to that side of me, the other voice is sort of freed up to be not necessarily the problem solver, because it's not so much about, another voice knowing everything that I don't know, but at least to ask me questions, to try to get me to refocus a little bit. Because often what we're doing when we're full of self-doubt is we become almost fixated, we become obsessed with a certain idea. I think honestly, if we were to be at all physically aware in that moment, as soon as we lose our physical awareness, we would realize that we have become completely enclosed in a very small space around us. Whether it be, staring at our desk. I think there's actually almost a physical effect to it. And if we can break out of that, then basically that's what we need. We need to break out of that space. We need to break out of that tunnel vision. And dreaming in dialogue can help us to sort of slowly, leave that space. Just having that conversation, having this other voice be supportive, ask us questions. And depending on what we want from it, we might want just, pure encouragement, or we might want a little tough love, depending on the situation or our personality. But we have so many options in that situation, and we've started to write. We might have gone from not feeling like we could write anything just to writing this dialogue. And this is something we can leave open on the side if we want, as we're working on something else. And it's a technique that both my dad and I have found very helpful over the years. And I wouldn't want to leave off this technique without saying that we have adapted this. We first read about it, a similar technique, conversational technique, from the novelist David Moreau. And we write in the book about how he himself took this technique from another novelist named Harold Robbins. So it's kind of one of those lovely, writer trees where we are influenced and inspired by each other, and taking this technique in a sense forward through each step. Any questions about that before I can say one other thing about, dealing with self-doubt?
Well, is there a possibility, and I'm just throwing that out there, that alter ego can be part of the book? Part of the process, more than just part of the process, but as also the collaborator in what you're writing?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely double as both a technique just to sort of, explore. One of the things that we talk about is it can be a technique to explore, life challenges even outside of creativity. But it can also be very much a analytical technique to explore a particular literary problem, to move forward in your own work. And this is a voice you can always draw upon. And, it's a voice that can represent even, your imaginary readers, and can draw you forward towards something that is going to more directly speak to them, in that way.
Cool. And then also, in doing that, it might help you develop exactly who you're writing this piece for.
Exactly, and that is something my dad and I really emphasize in the book as being very important. We actually put a chapter in that called Your Ideal Reader in the Dream Stage, because we believe it's very important early in the process to think about who you're writing for. There's a sense out there, you go to the bookstore, you see the books like displayed in the front, especially the bestsellers, and there's a sense that, so many different people are reading these books. Harry Potter, of course, is a great example, which seems to have been embraced by, half the planet. But that is something that happens after the fact. For the most part, even Harry Potter, again, is a good example because, J.K. Rowling wrote that book as a young adult book. She wrote that book to appeal to young adults. That was the business she had, and she wouldn't have had any necessary sense that, the book was going to jump beyond that audience and reach so many other groups. And it's the same with most books. Nobody really writes a book for everyone. We all hope that many people will read our book and benefit from it, but we tend to benefit more if we choose, a group of readers or one specific reader even, who we can imagine, whether literally or figuratively, sitting across from us at the table and sort of responding to our work based on the specific qualities we give them. And genre, of course, is the most, kind of overarching level of this analysis. What our genre is going to determine the type of ideal reader we might have, whether we're writing a mystery novel or a young adult novel, or narrative nonfiction or an instructional book that is aimed at a certain demographic or age group. We're going to know something about that ideal reader just from that genre, or we can learn, what genre we're writing on if we, for whatever reason, have conceived an ideal reader first.
Excellent. So what is one of the other points that, other than the alter ego, to help you get over the self-doubt?
Sure. So one of the other points we make, which has helped us over the years, is we have a chapter in the book called "Permit Yourself to Write Badly," and basically what that's about is that when when we really get to the heart of negativity, when we're experiencing what we call writer's block, it is easy to sort of just get absorbed in that and feel like there's just no way we can go to our keyboards, there's no way we can pick up a pen. And yet on some level we know that that is actually not true. That, there's nothing ripping the pen out of our hands, we're not being, physically tied to our chairs, our arms bound. We always can write something on the screen, even if it's just miscellaneous words or copying things out of the dictionary. We are physically capable of doing it, and we are, in fact, the only ones stopping ourselves from doing it. And often we are stopping ourselves because of an idea which seems true, but it is actually damaging to us, which is this idea that we have to write well, that we have to be writing really well, we have to be feeling inspired, and that if we aren't experiencing this, then there is something wrong with us. We are doing something wrong. When actually, the only way to write well is in the intermediate phase to permit ourselves to write badly. And in fact, that's what every author does. Because the idea is simply to keep writing. And so if you write badly one day and you write badly the next day, you know that eventually you are going to circle back and make what you have better. But that is part of the magic of the writing process, is that you do not, as we put it in the book, you don't write in stone, you write in sand. And you have that opportunity to come back and select, what works from your writing and reinforce that and pare away what doesn't work. And in fact, there's almost always something that you put down on the page, even if it's just a kernel that leads to the next sentence that has a slightly more important kernel that then leads to the next sentence. So even things that we end up cutting away often end up being pointers. They direct us toward other things that we need. So I think there's a lot of freedom in this idea that you don't have to write well all the time. And in fact, nobody does, including Booker Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, best-selling authors. Nobody writes well all the time. They write badly on the way to writing well. The most important thing is they just keep writing.
So with that point, how important to you do you feel is journaling?
Well, I think that journaling is a little bit distinct from this, because I think journaling, for me at least, as a practice, journaling really isn't about critical judgment at all. There's a little bit of a difference between someone like Anne Frank, who I think I don't exactly know when she decided that she was going to want to, to try to publish her journal eventually. But maybe she's actually a good example in a way, because when she first started journaling and she was writing to her, she had a perfect example of an ideal reader. She was writing to her imaginary best friend, Kitty. And she wrote her journal entries as sort of letters to Kitty. And at first she wrote more just to cope with being confined, during World War II. But eventually she did get this idea that she wanted to, she wanted to maybe publish the journal, and that's when we see this transition. We see this transition that between, pure free writing, which is really for expression. You're writing to just express what you want to say. You're writing often, often by hand. And I think partly people often still journal by hand because there's less of a prompt to edit in that. It's harder to edit something that you write by hand. You can't move things around in the same sense. You don't necessarily want to cross things out. You just can keep writing again and just keep expressing yourself. But if you decide you want to publish something, you want to share it with others, that's when you're going to go back and you are going to start editing and maybe copying over and shifting things around and thinking about how the reader will experience what you're writing. So journaling to me is more of a practice again about finding support, finding sustenance from the act of writing, from the act of expressing. A lot of people write journals and then never even go back and read them. It's just that act of writing that matters to us. Whereas, again, if you make that transition at some point and actually do want to share with the world, I think this is where development comes into play. This is where refining comes into play. This is where it's important to have an ideal reader. This is where it's important to just kind of get distance from your own writing so you can view it from another vantage point, the vantage point of a reader, and see, what is clear in your own head that might not be clear to another person based on what you've actually put on the page.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking of Wayne Dyer, who handwrites all his books. So
right, I've heard that.
And then his secretary types it up. So, everybody has their little different ways of doing it. And for Ken, he always says he feels like he's connecting to his muse using a pen and paper versus hands on a keyboard. So that's his way of connecting.
Exactly. Whatever works for any person. And that's a major aspect of our book. There's a reason it's titled The Creative Compass, but there's a reason it's subtitled Writing Your Way from Inspiration to Publication. Because, we really think this idea of discovering your own way of working is just central to the creative process. And we want to emphasize that discovery is not so much, the idea is not so much to go with your first impulses, whatever strikes you as the thing you should do first, but to actually pay attention. This is where journaling can come in very handy because it's an important tool of self-observation. To pay attention to, what actually works for you. Not just what is making you feel good, but what is actually delivering results. What is helping you to write more often? What is helping you to put more words on the page? What is helping you to, to see your own work in a new way? And keeping track of that and sort of refining your own process, thinking of your process as something you create and develop and refine is, an essential way of moving forward over time.
So with that, I'm curious about what was the inspiration for you with your first book, which was Profile Creative Artists in the Middle East. What was it that prompted you that that'd be a really interesting book to write?
Well, actually, the inspiration for that project was an assignment from a publisher. So it was obvious to me from the beginning that it would be a really interesting book to write, and I was asked by my Lebanese publisher, Turning Point Books, to write the profiles for the book. All I knew, they gave me a lot of freedom, which I really appreciated, because all I knew was that I needed to write a certain number of profiles in a certain amount of time, and they were also instrumental in introducing me to people and setting up interviews. And they already had hired a wonderful photographer, Roger Macarzel, to take the portraits, the visual portraits of various Lebanese personalities. And so then they hired me to write those profiles. And as we, talked at the beginning of the project, it became clear that it was a great opportunity to basically not just kind of look at these individuals' lives, particularly because we were going for something more timeless because it was going to be a book, but also to look at, the way they worked and, to see what lessons in a way could be drawn from how they thought about creativity, what they did. So I would say that that book was also very much an inspiration for the Creative Compass because, and I write some about that book in this book, because that gave me this opportunity again to see how differently different kinds of artists work, but at the same time also what they have in common across disciplines. Because I profiled a choreographer, a photographer, actors, musicians, composers, directors, sculptors, authors, and people who were not only very talented but also quite articulate, especially when asked a variety of interesting questions, quite articulate on their work and how they worked and, what did and did not mean the most to them.
So with that experience, did it kind of inspire you to go further with the creative process for yourself then, and in other ways other than just a creative compass? Are you now looking at other ways to express yourself as a creative artist?
When you say other ways, do you mean, you can clarify that.
Writing, or do you want to do painting or music, or do you really feel that your creative process is mainly with writing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually have always done a variety of different arts. As I write in the book, I did a lot of acting when I was younger, and I also have kind of, moved into different disciplines over the years. I did dance. I did a lot of yoga after that, so sort of gymnastics, the dance, the yoga. And now I actually do play music some, and I sing, and these are all very important to me, and mapping sort of the connections between them, I find, helps me to create. I still consider myself first and foremost a writer, but all of these other things that I do, I bring back to my writing. And yeah, it teaches me about writing, and it gives me, again, a new vantage point on that work. So I would recommend to anyone to, I think that we have sort of a bounty, of creativity around us, and sometimes that's another way, again, getting back to your question, which I think is such an important one about how to deal with self-doubt. Sometimes it can be helpful to work creatively in an area where you don't necessarily expect as much from yourself. That is one thing that really helps me. I don't have the same expectation when it comes to singing, for example, as I do with writing. Writing is much more of a vocation, and singing remains at this point a little bit more of a hobby. So it's something that I can work seriously on and work deeply in, but I simply don't feel the same pressure, and so that allows me a kind of break from writing, and then it enables me to kind of release, some of that tension that comes with doing something again that you love and so want something from, and to eventually take back whatever I learn, to the page when I eventually return to it.
And with that, let me ask you this: do you think in the present time that there is a push or a need for self-expression in some creative way?
You mean a push coming from inside the person or from outside?
Both.
That's interesting. I would say,
for me,
go ahead.
For me, I know that I'm meeting more people who it's almost like they have a story, they have that something in there they have to get out, either a song, a sculpture, a painting, some kind of expression, and they're really feeling this push to get it out. But in all they're doing, there really is an inspiration and almost like giving other people permission to do the same. And I'm just wondering if that might have been somewhere in the back of your mind with this book, because it definitely is really helping people and giving them permission. You can do this, and let us help you find a way to do it. So I'm just wondering if you feel this is an important time for self-expression.
Yeah, and I think that I kind of feel like this has always been true, that it's just sort of a human capacity that we do, we need to express what's in us, and that is a part of our lives. And, I think that when it comes to the outside world, that's where we tend to meet more challenges. There's a reason why of course, we sort of need to permit ourselves to dream and to do creative work, because often the world seems to be telling us that, we should be more practical, we don't have time for that, we should be more focused on the sort of mundane aspects of the world, whether it be making money or just the general busyness of life. And so there is always that pressure on people. But I think that in a sense that pressure has a little bit of a positive side, which is that maybe it does put us a little more in touch with those things that we actually need to express. And on top of that, the more we face up to those challenges, the more we sort of float that pressure from the world, that sense of skepticism and disapproval, the more satisfaction we get from actually doing our work, from actually moving forward despite that opposition. I've been reading a lot of screenplay books because I'm actually going to be adapting one of my father's books into a screenplay, his novel, The Journey to Socrates. And one of the things I read in a couple of the screenplay books which really interested me was this idea that the antagonist in a work, in a story, is there as a transformative force on the protagonist. That the antagonist, in challenging and opposing the protagonist, actually forces the protagonist to change in positive ways. And so what you asked now reminds me of that, because in a sense, our being challenged, it sort of points us, when we're challenged by something and when we know we still really want to do it, the collision of that, that negative force with our own desire, I think, can be positively transforming as we push through, whether it be the doubt or, more tangible opposition from the outside world.
It's like facing your deepest fear and knowing you can get through it.
Exactly.
And something that popped in my head that came into my mind that actually inspired the book I'm working on is, your enemy is really your ally. It's when does the enemy truly become your ally? And understanding that it's really been your ally all along.
Well, maybe part of it also is that, we have the opportunity to make our enemies our allies because, again, we can ask questions, we can challenge our own assumptions, our own certainties, and our own first impressions and come to new conclusions. And, again, I think it's important to grasp that it's really we ourselves that have to give ourselves permission. And this is very important. My dad and I, we don't see ourselves as, we're not the authority. We're not, it's not our role to give ourselves, to give, writers or creators permission to work. They have that permission. They just need to give it to themselves.
Exactly. And if you go on with your book, and believe it or not, we're almost done with this interview. Can't believe how fast time goes. And I do want to touch on the aspect of once you get it refined and you feel good about it, and you say share it. With sharing it, do you think it's a good idea to share it among friends, to get their ideas on the book, or in what way do you think it's a good way to get it out there to see what really is the best way to handle it?
Indeed. I mean, in both the develop and the refine stages, we give questions to help the writer, and again, let's just use, writing as the model here, to help the writer solicit and make the most of feedback from fellow writers, from friends, from acquaintances, from early readers. And that is an incredibly important part of the process, if you eventually want real readers to enjoy your work. Because imaginary readers can only get us so far. We still need to ask, real people for their impressions, and then to take from what they say and use that to further develop our work. And that's one reason why, we lay out the stages as a linear process, as a cycle that you move through with each project over the course of, your writing life. But there's another aspect to it, which is that both the refine and share stages can sort of double as a revolving door. Sometimes we think we're ready to refine, or we think we're ready to share, and we get feedback that makes it clear to us that actually we need to go back to development, so we've missed something important. And this is something that we want to emphasize that happens to everyone, and it's not necessarily fun in the moment of figuring that out, but once we can orient ourselves in the 5 stages, and that's really what we look on as the central benefit of the 5 stages, is it helps the writer and it helps us to feel less lost, even if we're struggling, even if we're facing considerable difficulties, we can still orient ourselves in a kind of story that has, a beginning, middle, and an ending. And that orientation can be very reassuring. Again, it can help us with self-doubt. It can help us with negativity. It can help us to keep writing. And the most important thing is to realize how many other writers might have had to go from refine back to develop, to go from share back to develop. And, just to give one encouraging example, my dad and I, we had sold the book based on a proposal, but then we had to write the manuscript for what was not yet titled The Creative Compass at that point. And there was a point when we had done one round of developmental editing and thought we were going to move to the copy edit, and the comments we got back from the editor made it clear that we weren't done developing. So we did a lot more work on the manuscript. And, at first, it was quite discouraging seeing some of those comments, but the more work we did, the more we realized that it was going to be such a better book than we even had envisioned in the beginning. And so by the time we finished that stage and really were ready to refine, we were really relieved and just happy that we had had that opportunity to do that second round. So, it's a little bit of an emotional roller coaster ride, I think, writing and creating, but inevitably, if we just keep moving, we return to feeling inspired, we return to feeling good, and we have transformed ourselves in the work in a way we might never have expected.
And with that process, how exactly did you guys get together and write, or did she write separately, you write, and then you combine the ideas? How exactly did that work?
Sure. So we did decide to sell the book based on a proposal. And a proposal is a great tool when it comes to any collaboration, because it turns that initial writing phase into a little bit more, I don't want to exaggerate too much, but a little bit more of a fill in the blank. Because we know we have specific sections of a proposal we need to write. And my dad, focused more on some of the important, marketing platform related documents, and I sort of approached more. In a proposal, you have to have sort of an introduction, which tells you what the book is about, and then you have to have an actual table of contents in which you lay out all the chapters and major sections your book is going to have, and you even have to have a sentence describing each chapter. So it's sort of an amazing thing, this idea that you're going to, in a sense, vision, the entire book before any such book exists. And so, I did a lot of work on that those initial sections, those initial chapters, based, again, on conversations my dad and I had over the years, and then some, work he had done before we started working on the proposal. And once we had that list of chapters, really, actually, after we sold the proposal in November of 2012, I guess, last year, we split up the list, basically. We knew we were going to write a memoir, a more personal essay that for each section, so we knew we were going to write those, and then we split up the other chapters. And because I'm based in D.C. and my dad is in California, this, again, was kind of a nice aspect, because writing is, even when writing is collaborative, it is still sort of a solo act. We each retreated to our own spaces to draft our chapters, and only once we had drafted them, and actually in our case we had our own ideal reader in my mom, and she read each of the chapters after we wrote them and gave us initial feedback, and only then did we swap them with each other and begin that sort of complementary roles type collaboration where I would play the writer and my dad would play the editor, and vice versa. And that's when sort of the rewriting or the development began. And really the development was, in a sense, the bulk of the work. It's like that first few months in which we wrote the first draft, we did many, many more months of work, of rewriting, revising, developing that manuscript. And let me just say quickly that one of the reasons we use this word development as opposed to just, using the words that people are more familiar with, revision, rewriting, is partly because sometimes when you use the same words over and over again, like we all sort of start to forget what those words really mean. I mean, if you think about the word revision, if you think about what we're literally saying to see again. And it comes from revisere in Latin, which means to look at again. And that's such an important aspect of transforming a work. We actually have to be able to see it again. And so that word is still very useful, but the reason we, again, chose to use this word development is because we wanted readers to take a fresh look at these words they normally use. And the word development is actually already used in both the editing world and in film. In editing, we talk about a developmental edit, which is where we essentially, a developmental editor will give you an actual written report in which they evaluate different elements of your work, character, plot, theme, dialogue, and they will allow you to do big picture revisions, and that's what the development stage is all about. And similarly in film, we talk about films being in development, and again, that's when all that big transformative work has to happen before a screenplay can be polished and then deemed ready to shoot and made into a film. So the concept of development kind of goes a little bit beyond the concept of rewriting and revising, which can sometimes seem to suggest that we just, we have all our words, we just need to shuffle them around a bit and clean them up a bit. And, development suggests that actually we may need to add more. We may need to do more, major alterations on the road to, again, maybe even discovering still what we actually need to say, which is such an important part of writing. Finding our way there, so then we can refine that message, that story, and then it's ready to send into the world.
And it also gives you time to find your true voice in the writing process. At least for me, it's in the development of, I found what I truly feel comfortable in writing in, because there's so many different writing styles and genres, and I do think each one has almost a slightly different voice. So writing and developing, you're developing your voice along the way.
Absolutely. And again, I think you've hit on a key point. Voice is something we need to develop over time. In the book we talk about voice and we compare it. It's a little bit like handwriting. I don't know if writers of the future may have difficulty if they no longer learn handwriting in school, which is looking like a developing trend. But we're very. It tends to be more intuitive, the idea that we develop our handwriting over time and through practice and through choosing, whether it be, subconsciously or consciously making choices as to how we want to shape the letters. And we do a similar type thing when it comes to voice. We develop preferences of vocabulary. And first, of course, we have to learn that those words exist in the first place to decide whether or not we prefer them. We develop preferences when it comes to sentence structure, how we phrase, how we begin a paragraph, how we end a paragraph. When we use questions, when we use statements, all of it, it's like there's only a certain number of different elements, probably a large number of it, so there's only a certain number, so it's really the specific combination of elements that makes any writer, sound unique in a similar way that the way we each speak sounds unique, again, based on those choices, some of which are conscious and many of which become automatic over time.
Right. Just for me, it's like when I'm writing poetry, it's much different than when I'm writing my blog. I mean, it's like two sides of the brain almost. And believe it or not, we're coming to the end. So real quick, what else are you doing? What is going on, and how can people get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. So to read more about the book and to find out more about my dad and I, the best place to go is our website. So my website is sierra-prasada.com. That's www.sierra-prasada.com. And you can read more about my work and the book and my first book as well. And my dad's website is peacefulwarrior.com, so www.peacefulwarrior.com. And he has a lot of interesting material from his many, many, many years of work on that website as well.
Yes, and again, for your dad, thank you to both of you for the inspiration and the kick in the butt to get my act together. So I thank you both very much for this book, and I thank you for being on air. It's been a wonderful conversation, and if you ever have something else you want to talk about, please let me know. I really enjoyed talking with you and learning from you. So I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sure my dad would want me to pass on his own thanks and best wishes to you with all your projects.
Thank you very much. And with that, this is Jennifer Hellman on Abstract Solutions Radio, where we say, with each breath of air, we hope you get new insights and information. Until next time, many blessings, and thank you for listening.